Hey guys, welcome back into the show. Welcome to VAV Live. I hope you guys enjoyed last week the rebroadcast of our company launch from earlier last year in August. I wanted to say Happy Women's Month and also congratulate all the women and wish all the women a happy International Women's Day. You guys really do not get enough credit for everything y'all do for the whole world. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and we mentioned it in our very first broadcast. You might remember it was just a little 5 or 10 minute tease with myself and my daughter Naomi, who is behind the camera today. We talked about wanting to talk about technology and how we push forward the industry, but also how we help women continue to achieve their goals and do the amazing things y'all are doing in media and technology in the broadcast space. So I want to tell you a story really quick, and then we're going to jump into talking about some of this tech. So a couple of years ago, I was technical directing a live stream for a town hall for a large conference for a well-known law firm. I won't say their name here, but one of the major talking points was around how these large corporations begin to litigate or begin to lobby or do different things in the legal world to try to force people back into the office or to try to force people to make hard choices. And one of the things that they were talking about a couple of years back during the pandemic was the how do we begin to see work from home, whether it's a right or whether it is a privilege, meaning it is a benefit, meaning it's something that they can pay you less to do, right? And in today's world, we see job posting after job posting after job posting where a remote position or a hybrid position pays demonstrably less than a work from the office position. We've seen things like quiet quitting. We've seen some of these other things that happen. I've had innumerable conversations with good friends of mine who are in the recruiting industry, who speak to hiring managers and executives all the time, who will tell you that some of these companies are leveraging all of this to walk back some of the salary increases and some of the increases in work from home and flexible scheduling and all these kind of things that we saw during the pandemic to get back to the way things used to be, to where they're most comfortable, with no really concern for what the people doing the work actually feel or want. Now, one of the things that we saw during the pandemic, right, was an increase of companies being more willing to allow people out of necessity to work in a remote or more flexible fashion. What we've begun to see is the emergence of technology, and if you clicked on to join the live stream, you probably saw an article posted that I wrote back in August for CXO Tech Magazine talking about the emergence of integrations between hybrid AV and broadcast workflows and how that really is driving work from home and work flexibly and work remotely. Now what we're seeing is every major broadcast company, and I'm talking about manufacturers, not specifically production companies, not the NBCs and Netflixes of the world, but the manufacturers, the companies like Blackmagic, who had a major announcement a couple weeks back where they rolled out some new remote camera stuff. JVC has a line of remote cameras now that are pretty awesome. But we talked about in the article, all of these things that are happening in technology whereby it's making it easier, less fatiguing, more productive from a cost mindset to allow or engage people in a remote fashion. One of the things that I want to talk about today is the development of something that we call a virtual window, right? So what is that, right? Well, we can, you can look it up later, but in short, what it is you take a television or a large video wall and you hang it on the wall in the office somewhere or in your home. We have a couple hung up in the studio, and you'll see us in the coming weeks. We'll be moving from the library into the studio to be able to show you and demonstrate some of this tech for you. But basically what you do is you take a screen of whatever type and you hang a camera somewhere, and then it becomes a virtual window into the other office or someone's home. And some people might say, I don't want people looking at my home all the time, and that's fair enough. If it's early in the morning and it's a 7 a.m. meeting with London, let's say, and I haven't had my coffee yet, I don't want you looking in my house either. But having said that, what it's been able to demonstrate is that there are ways to create that water cooler culture, that break room, lunchroom culture, where you're just having these impromptu conversations while not in the office. Now, a lot of these senior managers, the Elon Musks of the world, right, want to tell you can't be productive from home. But I'm here to tell you that's just not the case, right? And it's just not. All of the numbers suggest that during the pandemic, most people were somewhere between a third and twice as over again more efficient than they were in the office. And I can tell you, during the pandemic, I had a number of conversations, whether that was in person, whether that was on Zoom, whether that was via social media platforms, where you have managers saying, well, how do I know you're working if I can't see you all of the time? How do I know you're working 100% of the time? To which my response is, you're not entitled to me working all of the time. At least in the United States, labor laws dictate that if I'm there for an 8, I get an 8-hour lunch, I get 2 15-minute breaks, and then I get bathroom breaks as I need them. Right. So right off rip, that's nearly 2 hours of an 8-hour day that I'm not productive at all, right? Whereas the numbers suggest that people, when they work from home, the first thing they do when they wake up in the morning, before they even go to the bathroom, is they check their phone and they check Slack or Teams or Zoom or whatever piece of software your company uses for corporate chat and corporate comms, right? So you're starting earlier, you're working through your lunches, you tend to eat your breakfast and your lunch at wherever your computer's at, and then you tend to work later. Numbers show that people tend to work later into the evening, where they might have an iPad or a phone or something in the kitchen with them as they're preparing dinner. They'll have the same device with them while they're sitting there in the evening watching Netflix or helping their kids with their homework or whatever. So people tend to not turn off when working remotely, and so we tend to be much more efficient and work much longer when we tend to work remotely. So how does this have anything to do with anything we've been talking about in this program, right? So as you might remember, the whole raison d'etre for the company and the show and just all of it is to advance women in these various industries around production and tech and wherever else, to help level the playing field, as it were, right? So what does this have to do with any of that? I'm glad you asked. So one of the things we saw during the pandemic was when you had a married couple, and numbers suggest this, that where both people were working, the wife was much more inclined to stop working or take a job where her hours were less or where her responsibilities were less, sometimes, more often than not, honestly, at a very steep pay cut, right? So what does this have to do with how do we fix this? How do we begin to solve this? Well, part of the problem is that these companies, they want to force everyone back into the office because they have real estate agreements that they need to live up to, or they want to live up to. They're getting pressured to, and so they're trying to force everybody back into an in-office dynamic. But the problem is, when people have been off work for, or working remotely at the very least, for 6 months, a year, 2-3 years, and in some cases a little more than that, engaging childcare and getting that ramp back up is really, really complicated. It is really difficult, and unfortunately, what happens is the women in our lives end up paying the cost for that. Very rarely are companies interested in hearing a man say, "Oh, well, I don't have childcare, or I don't have the ability to come in today because I've got my child with me," or whatever. Whereas there is much more often the case is the assumption is mom is looking after the babies. And so these companies are much more comfortable with, you know, forcing a woman onto a work from home job where she makes 2/3 of what she probably could or should be making. So how do we solve this, right? What do we do, right? Well, I'm literally live streaming to you from the library in my apartment right now with a single camera, a couple of lights, a laptop, a few other things, right? This demonstrates how you can be functional with a minimal amount of tech and with just the right expertise. Now, fair enough. I've been doing this a long time, and so I know what to do. But that's one of the reasons VAV exists, right? Is to provide that leadership and that guidance and that expertise to help people set up these kind of situations. So let's talk more about the virtual window thing again. There's another virtual window setup where we're seeing them used to create actual windows and skylights. I saw an article recently where they had taken an LED television and they had mounted it in the ceiling, and they had mounted it in the ceiling. Pardon me just a second, just checking texts. And they had created a virtual skylight. We've seen other things for years where they create these virtual landscapes where it's not really a window, but it looks like Paris or Milan or Rome or wherever. There's so much cool stuff we can do with this tech. But what we can do really effectively nowadays is we can create a scenario by which people can get that feeling like they're in the office. Managers can feel like they're seeing people, and everything just works, right? It all works. So I would love to hear from you guys. I would love to be able to get some comments, get some emails, things of that nature, to hear your stories, hear how your life has changed pre, mid, post pandemic, and we'll begin to feature some of these stories and anecdotes over the course of the next few weeks. But one of the next things I want to discuss is how the price point is coming down, right? So when I first started in broadcasting nearly 30 years ago, if you were going to set yourself up with a studio, whether it was in your home, whether it was a company, whether it was a proper television station, you're talking about $250,000 to $500,000 spend, just like that, right off rip. Nowadays, again, whether it's Blackmagic or Ross or Aja, there's a significant amount of tools available where you might spend $500, $600, $800 on technology, and you've got yourself set up. You might spend $200, $300, $400 on some lights, get a halfway decent camera for a couple $100. You know, maybe you get yourself a nice little switcher. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just do a capture device, or you just use a DSLR with a USB cable and a piece of software, and you're ready to go, right? And so how do we convince the world to change? And that's the reason this program exists, is trying to convince the world to change. Because the reality is 90% of us can do 90% of what we need to do without ever leaving our homes. We can do our jobs in our pajamas, which, I mean, show of hands, who's interested in that? Like, I'm not interested in putting on a tie and going into the office most days. I'm sure most of you aren't, and ladies, I'm sure you're not interested in putting on the heels and having to contend with subway grates and everything else just to get into the office to deal with that. The other thing that's really great about remote culture, right, is we have seen a precipitous decline in harassment incidents because we're working from home and maybe your camera's off and no one necessarily knows what you look like or whatever. And so there are not as many incidents, based on the conversations I've had with HR executives over the course of time, as before. It allows everyone to be more inclusive and just feel more cared for. One of the things that's great about that is I was having a conversation with a project management colleague the other day, and we were talking about building a conference room, right? And one of the things that always happens is you build the conference room, and the front end of the conference room table is exposed to the camera. And so what happens? The first 2 or 3 seats in the front of that conference room table gets to be June, July. It's hot. Everyone's hot and sweaty. You know, some people want to wear shorts or skirt or a dress to feel comfortable. So what happens is you can't sit in those first 2 seats, right? And I go through this all the time as an engineer. So many engineers in the field these days, you know, since the beginning of the industry were men. And so most men don't think about a woman's level of comfort, right? We don't think about it because, you know, it's like you think you get a, you know, I'm based here in New York. I live in New York, and you get on the subway here in New York or really any city, and what do you see? What's the first thing you see? You see the guys doing the man spread, right? And taking up 3 seats when they should be taking up 1, right? And so we don't think about those kind of things generally. But, you know, hashtag girl dad. So I think about those things all the time. And so as an engineer, it's important that we call these things out. And so for a moment, I want to speak to the men. Guys, look, like enough's enough, right? You know, there are so many great women in our industries. There are so many great, you know, women who are in IT or in construction or in audiovisual engineering or broadcast, or like whatever it is, whatever the field. There's so many great women here. We got to begin to remember what the NBA commercials used to say a few years ago. Where they talked about leaning in, and you would have the LeBron James or somebody, you know, doing a commercial with a Brittany Griner or another star from the WNBA talking about leaning into, you know, issues that are of specific importance to women. We got to do that more in our industries. And I can think of no better thing in Women's History Month, the week of International Women's Day, than to just put the call out. We have to lean in, right? And when you see, you know, a boss or a colleague being difficult, speak up about that. But also, we've got to continue to drive the initiative. We've got to drive the industry forward because, like I said in my article, if companies that choose to ignore this wave of people who are working more flexibly, working remotely, working on, you know, hybrid or working on more flexible scheduling, it's only good for all of us, right? But unfortunately, like, it's not us men who bear the brunt of childbirth and that first iteration of parenting. Numbers prove, and like, listen, there are always outliers. I'm a single dad. Like, there's always outliers where we're doing things or they're doing things or like whatever. But the truth is that in the workforce, it's significantly harder for women to advance. Not because they're not qualified. Oftentimes, they're double or triple qualified, but because the expectations on childcare are on the mother. Some of that's societal. We need to change that, right? We need to move away from, you know, gender-based, you know, roles in the home and like all this sort of stuff. I mean, Serena Williams said it best in her essay in Sports Illustrated from last year, where she was talking about retiring. What did she say? She said she could keep playing for another, you know, number of years, but she and her husband, Alexis Ohanian, who's a great follow on LinkedIn, by the way, that they wanted to have more kids. And in order for them to have more kids, she needed to retire to be able to do that because of just the way human biology works, right? And so unfortunately, that's the nature of it. So how can we help, right? One of the things we can do is we can press our employers and our colleagues and our business contacts, our clients, to do more inclusive things. And some of that looks like virtual windows. Some of that looks like more broadcast and more AV tech in homes, better budgets for giving people stipends to set their work from home environments up. It's so exciting the time we live in, to be honest with you, because in this generation, more than any other generation before, we have the opportunity to really advance things by leaps and bounds in ways we haven't seen since the beginnings of the internet. Right? We are right on the cusp of seeing the whole industry change. You know, I was having a conversation the other day, and I was talking to this person about what's going to change in the next 5 years, or 3 to 5 years, maybe 10 if you really want to go to the long range, right? is that when the internet first started and video conferencing and all of these things first started, all of these things were separate. You had video conference over here and broadcasting over there and like theater and events and stuff like that somewhere way over there. And now they're all this close. We're so close, right? That they've been converging inch by inch for probably 25 years, right? And so now we're right at the cusp of where that's all converging, and right as those things converge, bang, everything's going to change. And here's what's going to happen. Mark my words, write this down, is that within the next 5 years, a significant amount of everything we're doing is going to be here. It's going to be in the VR headset. It's going to be in that VR AR world, right? It's going to be in that place where instead of connecting to a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams or heck, even a live stream, I've already worked on productions just in the last couple of years where you are going to like a rooftop bar or a really high-end upper class place, and you're taking traditional film and TV cameras and you are putting that through a whole bunch of hardware and you're piping that into a VR space already. That was already starting to happen during the pandemic. And with the proliferation of affordable cameras and green screens and, composting technology, it's going to be so much easier in the next couple of years for everybody to do this cheaply and relatively easily with a minimal amount of expertise. Already you can go into Zoom and have Zoom do all of the compositing for your green screen for you. Now that green screen composite, it sucks, to be honest with you. It's not great, but you're asking a laptop more often than not to do complicated chroma key math that you shouldn't, right? But in the next couple of years, that's going to change. So we're going to see all of a sudden you put on a VR headset and you've got an avatar. Maybe you've done a 3D body scan. Maybe you haven't. And so you're able to converse with your colleagues, your friends, your family in VR in ways that you can feel really connected to each other, right? One of the hardest things about the pandemic, aside from like the medical situations, but just in terms of working from home, was the idea of Zoom fatigue, right? Well, medically, it's been shown that and you've seen me do this on this program, but a lot of people do it. If you're not working with a teleprompter, then what you get is this. Over and over again, as you look at the screen to look at the person who's talking, and then you look back up at the camera so they can see you, and these muscles in your eyes are not meant for that much activity, right? And so it's been proven that leads to exhaustion. And I don't feel like I'm alone in this in saying I sign off for the day from a day of work and I'm ready to pass out. I'm sure a lot of people are in that same boat, right? And so there's new tech coming that's going to help with that, right? And you can solve that today with things like a teleprompter. One of the things we pioneered with some of my work at American Movie Company was something called the Skytron, right? Where you're able to put, the broadcast image, someone's image, their video in a teleprompter fairly easily. We were able to do that with History of Swear Words. We were able to do that. With a Vino ad that Jennifer Aniston was in. There was looked like it was on a Zoom call. A few other things. Like if you're interested in all the ways that we pioneered that, hit me up in the comments and we can talk offline, and I can tell you everything you want to know about how that works, right? But what we found was that even when working with just everyday business people, it was really, really significant in helping them not be nearly as fatigued. But one of the new things that's coming that's really interesting, it's going to be really cool. There's a company called Hudley. Hudley makes video conference cameras for conference rooms. And you can get one that goes on your desk, on your monitor, and they make ones for larger conference rooms. They've got a new product that's coming out this year. It was just rolled out at ISE over in Spain about a month ago. It's called the Hudley Director. Right? I'm actually in the advanced beta for this, and I was involved in the sort of some of the initial fact-finding phases and things about things. This is basically what it does: is you network multiple 3, 4, whatever number of cameras together, and there's AI built into the thing, right? Where they've worked with film and TV directors from all over the world to to mimic the way of a television technical director, the things that I do for a living, to cut and switch cameras and use the camera angles and the types of cuts and transitions that a television person would select, right? And that's going to be on the market this year, right? And so all of these things are coming that are going to help us be able to be less fatigued, fresher at work, and more easily able to do the same kind of work and have very similar experiences remotely. So what does that do to change the culture and the landscape of work? Well, for years, right? And I'm sure everyone's seen like the Upwork or whatever ad with the zombie, and they're talking about, you know, hiring people off of the internet. And my daughter loves that commercial. She thinks it's hysterical. Don't you know the commercial with the zombie baby? Remember, you know that you like with the song, you like that, right?
And the one with the other one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what changes about that? Well, if I've got a video wall, if I've got a large television or a virtual window on my wall where I can see someone and we're talking and we're working collaboratively, and there's not an expectation that I need to be staring them down like this and looking right at the screen, and I can just be working and just calling out, you know, maybe I've got a little speaker bar or something, I can just be calling out and saying, hey Tammy, can you get me that file or this and that, or hey, I just threw this up on the SharePoint or on the Google Drive. Then there's less fatigue because I'm not staring you down and constantly doing this number all the time. But also, who's experienced this? You've got your headset on, and you've been sitting there working and talking and going back-to-back meetings for 3 or 4 hours. All of a sudden, your ears hurt, right? I've experienced it. We've all experienced it. Now, some of us in my family have these ears that stick out, so it's much worse. But you're less fatigued. You're more present with everybody. You're less cranky about it. But what this opens up is I can be sitting here on my laptop, having a conversation with you here while I'm functional here, and I don't actually need to ever leave the house if I don't want to. So what that opens up is it makes all of our working environments 1,000% more inclusive. Just picture a world where someone who has trouble ambulating, they have a leg injury of some kind. I suffer with knee problems, right? So this resonates for me. That doesn't always need to get in and out of the office. And so if they're having a day where they just got to have their foot up and, you know, with an ice pack or like whatever, and they can still be functional. And they can still be, and there's not a deficit. It's not like, oh, I don't get the same experience when I'm at home versus in the office. You can still get a very nearly the same similar experience. Well, just imagine someone who has some chronic illness, you know, someone who has, you know, debilitating migraines or whatever, or a chronic syndrome that it will enable them to work when they can, work when they are able, right? But then the other piece of this, and this is where getting back to the central message, more and more women are forced out of the workforce because they go on maternity. They leave for whatever period of time they leave. Now, when a woman's on maternity, her position is protected, right? Because it's considered disability, which is an entirely different conversation, which is silly, you know, at the outset. But we've seen stories recently when Elon Musk took over Twitter, right? Of people who were on maternity or paternity leave, and Elon Musk just, and the Twitter executives, they just forced them out. Well, that's technically illegal, right? You can't do that. People on maternity leave, their positions are protected by, there's a silly amount of laws that protect them, right? But he did it anyway. Why? Because he could, because he's a squillionaire, and he was like, what are they going to do, sue me, right? Even if they win, he's going to hand them some money and walk away, right? But when you have the ability to be conversant in the same way you would in the office, and to be functional the same way you would in the office, it allows people to work so much more and to be so much more productive and not have to be off of work just because you have a small child. When my daughter was small, right? Let me tell you, if for those of you who don't have kids, It's exhausting 100% of the time, right? They need things all of the time, and especially when they're really, really little, when they're newborns and infants and things of this nature. But there are pockets. Like, there are pockets where you can get stuff done, right? And so there's still all of this opportunity, and we're siloing and segregating some of our brightest and most brilliant minds because they had the audacity to want to start a family, right? That's where we got to change. The technology exists right now today in the wild, out there at Best Buy, that you can go buy right now, on Amazon, that you can go buy right now, that can set us up where we can be working flexibly and remotely and smartly and significantly upgrade what we're doing. The other piece of this, of the inclusion piece, is it broadens our horizons, it expands our borders. Since forever, right, if you wanted to go work for a company, you had to demonstrate, right, that you had the right to work in that country, right? You have to have a work permit or a visa, citizenship for whatever country you want to work in. But nowadays, with the innovation, I'll call it, of gig economy and just this flexible working culture, if I need a video edited, right, I can go on whatever marketplace and find someone to edit it from anywhere in the world. You know, here in the United States, Europe, Asia, wherever, and get what I need, whether it's production stuff, whether it's software design. I can get what I need from anywhere in the world. And more you're seeing companies go to this project-based work cycle where you get the people you need from where you need them from, so it broadens our horizons so that we no longer have to just think about local talent. And so for that and a whole bunch of other really good reasons, we need to continue to push forward, and we need to show the women in our lives the gratitude for everything they've done for us for, you know, eons, thousands of years, right? But also the way we thank them the most is by respecting them and venerating that they don't really need our help, right? And by just opening doors up so that they can shine, and their certain set of skills, in my best Liam Neeson voice, can shine through, and let them do what it is that they're best at, right? So that's about all the time we have for this week. Thank you for joining me. We'll be back right here next week with another installment of VAV Live, where we're talking about amazing technology and, you know, women in entertainment and production and technology. But until next week, my name is Vincent Allen, founder and managing director of VAV Industries. This has been VAV Live.